Join me as I dive into these animated horror stories and see if I can survive the night without getting too scared. Animated horror stories have a way of evoking fear and thrill in unique ways. They can transport us to a world of darkness and terror, making our imaginations run wild with the possibilities. We've all been there, sitting in the dead of night, surrounded by darkness, and wondering what lurks in the shadows. Horror stories tap into our deepest fears, taking us on a journey of suspense and terror. From creepy crawlies to haunted houses, our imaginations can conjure up some truly terrifying scenarios. And when it comes to animated horror stories, the possibilities are endless. In these tales, the unknown becomes even more sinister, and the lines between reality and fantasy are blurred. Our minds are wired to respond to fear, and animated horror stories know just how to push those buttons. So, buckle up, because we're about to embark on a journey into the heart of horror. One of the most terrifying aspects of horror stories is the unknown. The unexplained noises, the creepy figures lurking in the shadows, the uncertainty of what's going to happen next. All of these elements combine to create an atmosphere of suspense and fear. And when you add animation to the mix, the possibilities for terror become endless. Whether it's a haunted mansion, a creepy forest, or even a possessed object, the animated world of horror is full of endless possibilities. Animated horror stories also have a way of tapping into our primal fears, taking us back to a time when we were kids, huddled around the campfire, listening to scary stories. They evoke a sense of nostalgia, reminding us of the thrill and excitement of being scared out of our wits. And yet, as adults, we still crave that sense of fear, that rush of adrenaline that comes with being terrified. As we delve deeper into these animated horror tales, you'll notice that some common themes start to emerge. The theme of being trapped, for instance, is a classic horror trope. Whether it's being stuck in a haunted house or trapped in a never-ending nightmare, the feeling of being confined is a universal fear that resonates with us all. And then, of course, there's the theme of the unknown, the unexplained, and the supernatural. Let's take a moment to immerse ourselves in one of the most intense moments from one of these horror stories. Imagine yourself walking down a dark forest path, the trees towering above you like skeletal fingers. You hear the rustling of leaves, the snapping of twigs, and suddenly, you're face to face with, well, I won't spoil it for you. Just remember, you're not alone. As you stand there, frozen in terror, you can't help but wonder, what would you do in this situation? Would you try to run? Or would you stand your ground and face whatever horrors lie ahead? The beauty of animated horror stories is that they allow us to tap into our own fears and imagine how we would react in the most terrifying situations. The experience of watching animated horror stories is a unique one. It's a thrill ride of suspense and terror, a journey into the heart of fear itself. And yet, as we emerge from the darkness, we're left with a sense of exhilaration, a sense of having survived the night. It's a feeling that's hard to explain, but it's one that keeps us coming back for more. Thanks for joining me on this journey into the world of animated horror stories. If you've got a favorite scary tale, be sure to share it with us in the comments below. And if you're ready for more thrilling content, be sure to check out our next video for even more chills and spills. Part 1. The Broadcast. It started as a harmless ritual, something that became almost addictive. Every Friday night, I'd sit down in front of my laptop, headphones in, and watch an animated horror story. I wasn't a fan of horror at first, but these short films had a strange charm. The eerie music, the unsettling visuals, the way they played with shadows and silence. It always left me with a sense of creeping dread, the kind that sticks with you long after the screen goes dark. But then, one night, something changed. It was a video I had never seen before. No title, no description, just a black thumbnail. I clicked it, expecting the usual rush of adrenaline as the tale unfolded. The screen remained black for a long moment, long enough for me to think the video had glitched. Then, slowly, a shape emerged from the darkness. A dimly lit room appeared, filled with old, dusty furniture, and in the middle of it stood a child, facing away from the camera. A cold sweat ran down my spine. The child stood perfectly still, unnervingly silent. Then the sound started. Not music, not footsteps, just a soft, distorted whisper, almost like static. The child's head twitched, and then slowly, almost imperceptibly, began to turn toward the camera. The frame zoomed in closer, but something was off. The image was too real, too detailed, as if someone had filmed this not in a studio but in a forgotten corner of the world. I wanted to look away, but my hand wouldn't move from the mouse. The child's head continued to twist unnaturally, the neck cracking audibly through my headphones, until the face came into view. It was warped, inhuman, with black, hollow eyes and a grin stretched far too wide for its face. And then, it spoke. "I'm coming for you." I jerked back, pulling off the headphones. My heart was racing, hands trembling as I tried to close the browser. But the video kept playing. The voice was growing louder, clearer, as if it wasn't coming from the headphones anymore. It was in the room with me. I scrambled to unplug the laptop, shutting it off, but the sound persisted, the distorted whispering wrapping around me like invisible hands. It felt like something was watching me, lurking just beyond the edge of my vision. That's when I heard it, the soft creak of floorboards from the hallway. I froze, blood turning to ice. The door to my room was open. I could see the shadows shifting in the dim light from the hallway, moving unnaturally, like they had a life of their own. Someone was out there. Or something. I didn't want to believe it, but the whispers, they were no longer coming from the laptop. They were outside my door. And just when I thought it couldn't get worse, the child's voice whispered again. Closer this time. "I'm inside." Part 2. The Visitor. The house had never felt this quiet before. Every creak, every slight shift in the air seemed amplified, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. My heart was pounding in my ears, and I fought the urge to look over my shoulder. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, was there, watching, waiting. The soft footsteps moved closer, slow but deliberate, almost as if whatever was out there knew I was frozen in place. I backed away from the door, trying to stay quiet, but the floor beneath me groaned loudly. I cursed under my breath, my eyes glued to the crack of the open door. There was a shadow, long and dark, cast against the wall. The footsteps stopped. My breath caught in my throat. Whoever, or whatever, it was, stood right outside my door now. I squeezed my eyes shut, hoping, praying that if I stayed still enough, it would go away. The air in the room felt heavy, suffocating. That same distorted whisper filled the space again, soft but persistent. It wasn't just noise anymore. I could almost make out words. "I see you." I couldn't breathe. My skin prickled with fear, my mind racing with the thought of what could be waiting on the other side of the door. The light in the hallway flickered for a moment, casting erratic shadows that seemed to twist and writhe. I clenched my fists, trying to steel myself, but every nerve in my body screamed to run. Just then, a soft knock echoed through the room. Not from the door, from the window. I spun around, heart leaping into my throat. The curtains swayed slightly, though there was no breeze. My window was on the second floor. There was no way anyone could be out there. But the knocking continued, slow, rhythmic, as if someone was patiently waiting to be let in. I forced myself to take a step toward the window, inching closer despite the overwhelming urge to flee. My pulse hammered in my head, my vision narrowing to that one spot, the glass. The shadow of a hand brushed against the curtains, long and thin, dragging slowly down the fabric. I froze. There was a figure on the other side of the glass. Pale, skeletal fingers scraped against the window, leaving thin, jagged streaks. The knocking grew louder, more insistent. I reached for the curtain, hesitating, my hand trembling as I grasped the edge of the fabric. My gut screamed at me to stop, to turn around and run, but I couldn't. It was like I was being drawn in, compelled to see what was out there. Slowly, I pulled the curtain aside. Nothing. The window was empty. No figure, no hand, just darkness outside. I exhaled shakily, trying to convince myself that I had imagined it. I leaned closer, pressing my forehead against the cold glass, peering out into the night. That's when I saw it. A face, staring back at me from the reflection in the window. It wasn't mine. The twisted, grinning face of the child from the video stood just behind me, its black eyes boring into the back of my head. My scream lodged in my throat as I spun around, but there was nothing there. Just the open door, the dim hallway stretching out beyond it. I heard it again, the voice, but this time, it was different. Louder. Closer. "You can't hide from me." A cold breeze swept through the room, chilling me to the bone, and the door to the hallway creaked open just a little more. Whatever was out there wasn't waiting anymore. It was coming for me. Part 3. The door opens. I stumbled back, my eyes glued to the now wide-open door. The hallway outside was a gaping void, and in the silence, the sound of my breathing was the only thing keeping me tethered to reality. I wanted to scream, wanted to do anything to break this nightmare, but all I could do was back away, step by trembling step, from whatever was lurking just beyond the threshold. Then, the footsteps resumed. Slow, heavy, deliberate. Each step made the floor creak louder, as though something impossibly large and heavy was walking just outside my room. The shadows on the walls shifted unnaturally, elongating in strange shapes that didn't make sense, jagged and twisted, like broken limbs. The air grew colder, biting at my skin, and with each passing second, I felt it closing in. My mind raced, screaming for me to run, but my body refused to move. Suddenly, the light in the hallway flickered once more, and I caught a glimpse of it, a silhouette at the end of the corridor, standing in the darkness. It wasn't moving, but I could feel it watching me. It was tall, impossibly tall, with limbs that seemed to stretch beyond the edges of the doorway. Its head cocked slightly to the side, as if it was considering me, savoring the moment. I backed up until I hit the wall, my heart slamming against my ribs. The thing in the hallway didn't move, just stood there, looming, waiting. The silence between us stretched on, oppressive, until finally, the voice came again, soft and mocking. "Come closer." I shook my head, my throat too tight to speak, too paralyzed to scream. My legs trembled, threatening to give out, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I could not go to it. Whatever was in the hallway, it wanted me, needed me to come to it, but I wouldn't. I scrambled to the side, aiming for the closet. The door creaked as I flung it open and wedged myself inside, pulling the door shut behind me. I sat there in the darkness, breath hitching, listening intently for any sign that the thing outside had moved. But the only sound was the relentless thudding of my heart. Then I heard it, the soft drag of something being pulled along the floor. Slowly, almost teasingly, it moved closer to my room, closer to the closet. It was no longer trying to hide its presence. It wanted me to know it was coming. From the thin gap beneath the closet door, I saw it. Something was dragging along the floor. Not feet, not legs, just a shadow that twisted and rippled like smoke, creeping closer and closer until it pooled in front of the closet. I clamped my hand over my mouth to muffle the sound of my breathing. The shadow lingered, unmoving, as if waiting for me to make a sound. Then, the door to the closet rattled. I bit down on my lip, hard enough to draw blood, trying to keep myself still, silent. The rattling continued, a sharp metallic clattering as if something on the other side was clawing at the handle. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I just wanted it to stop. Then, without warning, the closet door flew open. But there was nothing there. No shadow, no figure, just the empty room beyond. I blinked, too stunned to react, my heart still hammering in my chest. Had it left? Had it gone? I slowly crawled out of the closet, staying low, my eyes scanning the room. The air still felt heavy, thick with the same oppressive presence, but there was no sign of the thing that had been in the hallway. Until I heard it again, the child's voice, whispering, closer now, much closer than before. "I'm in the room." I whipped around, scanning the shadows, but there was no one. I could feel it, though, its eyes on me, watching, waiting for me to make a mistake. And then I saw it, my reflection in the mirror. Except it wasn't my reflection at all. It was its. The child's face stared back at me from the glass, the same twisted grin, the same hollow black eyes. But it wasn't just watching anymore. It was coming through. The surface of the mirror rippled like water, and the figure in the reflection began to step forward, crossing from its world into mine. I stumbled backward, falling to the floor as the child's hand reached out of the glass, fingers stretching toward me. I scrambled to my feet, panic surging through my veins as I bolted for the door. But before I could reach it, the mirror shattered. Glass exploded across the room, and I shielded my face as shards rained down around me. When I looked up, the child was gone. But the room felt wrong, darker, as if the shadows themselves were closing in. And that's when I realized. It wasn't in the mirror anymore. It was in the room with me. Part 4. The Chase. The moment the glass shattered, the atmosphere changed. It was as if the room was breathing, alive with something malevolent. I could feel it moving, just beyond the edge of my vision, lurking in the dark corners, circling me. I didn't know where to look, where to run, but I knew one thing for certain. I had to get out. The child's voice was no longer whispering. Now it was a low, rasping breath, like someone exhaling through clenched teeth. It surrounded me, echoing off the walls, rising and falling in a slow, deliberate rhythm. I bolted for the door, but as soon as my fingers brushed the handle, it slammed shut with a deafening crack, almost crushing my hand. The force knocked me back, and I stumbled, barely catching myself before I hit the floor. The lights flickered again, but this time, they didn't come back on. I was plunged into complete darkness. Panic surged through me. My breathing was ragged, uneven, but I forced myself to stay quiet, stay still. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what was happening, but there was no logic here. No explanation. Just pure, raw fear. Then, the floor creaked behind me. It was so close, too close. I spun around, my eyes wide, searching the pitch-black room for any hint of movement. But the darkness was suffocating, pressing in on me from all sides. I could feel it watching, feel its gaze burning into the back of my neck. The rasping breath drew closer, the sound cutting through the silence like a blade. I took a step back, heart pounding in my ears, and my foot brushed against something cold, something that shouldn't have been there. I froze, terrified to look down, but my eyes were drawn to it anyway. There, on the floor, was a hand. Not just any hand. Its hand. Pale, bony, with fingers too long, too thin, stretching toward me from the shadows. It twitched, the fingers curling as if beckoning me closer. I recoiled, stumbling backward, but the hand kept coming, dragging itself across the floor. The breath was right behind me now, heavy and ragged. I could feel the cold air against my neck, and when I turned, my heart nearly stopped. The child was there, standing in the middle of the room. Its face was distorted, stretched into an impossibly wide grin, those black, soulless eyes fixed on me. Its mouth twitched, and in that soft, sing-song voice, it whispered again. "You can't hide." It lunged. I threw myself to the side just as its hands clawed through the air where I'd been standing. I hit the floor hard, my elbow slamming against the wood, but the pain barely registered. I scrambled to my feet, desperate to put as much distance between myself and it as possible, but the room felt too small, too confining. The walls seemed to be closing in, shrinking around me. It moved fast, far faster than I expected. One moment, it was across the room. The next, it was right in front of me, those long fingers reaching out to grab me. I darted left, then right, knocking over a chair in my rush to escape. But it was relentless, always just a step behind. My foot hit something solid, my bed. I lunged for it, diving underneath, my hands scraping against the rough wood as I pulled myself into the narrow space. The darkness under the bed was thick, almost suffocating, but I didn't care. I just needed to hide, needed to put something between me and that thing. I could hear it moving, its feet dragging across the floor as it searched for me. The sound was agonizingly slow, deliberate, as if it was savoring the hunt. I pressed myself deeper into the shadows, my heart pounding so loud I was sure it could hear it. The room grew quiet. For a long moment, there was nothing. No movement, no sound, just the oppressive silence pressing down on me. I held my breath, straining to listen, but all I could hear was the frantic beating of my own heart. And then, the whisper. So soft, I barely caught it. But it was there. Found you. I felt something cold brush against my ankle. Before I could react, it grabbed me. The hand wrapped around my leg, its grip icy and tight. I kicked out, panic flooding my veins, but its hold was impossibly strong. I clawed at the floor, trying to pull myself away, but it was dragging me out from under the bed. I twisted, trying to kick it off, and for a brief second, its grip loosened. I didn't waste any time. I kicked hard, the heel of my foot connecting with something solid, and I heard a sickening crunch. The hand released me, and I scrambled out from under the bed, gasping for breath. But it wasn't done with me. It lunged from the shadows, its face twisted in rage, black eyes gleaming with malevolent glee. I barely dodged in time, throwing myself toward the window. My hands fumbled with the latch, desperate to escape, but it was stuck, jammed shut. The cold breath on my neck returned, and I knew I didn't have much time. I turned to face it, knowing there was nowhere left to run. The child stood before me, its body shifting and warping like smoke. Its grin widened, impossibly wide, as it reached out once more. I braced myself for the inevitable, but then something strange happened. The air in the room shifted, and for the first time, I noticed something, a sound. Faint at first, but growing louder. It was the sound of a voice. A different voice. It wasn't coming from the child. It was coming from the video. My laptop, still on the floor, had turned itself back on. The screen flickered, and through the static, I heard the voice again. "You need to stop it." Part 5. The final broadcast. The voice from the laptop pierced through the suffocating tension in the room. It was different from the eerie whispers that had been tormenting me. It sounded more urgent, more real. I glanced over at the laptop, and through the haze of fear, a flicker of hope surfaced. "You need to stop it before it crosses over." The static on the screen cracked, and an image began to form. It was the same room I was standing in, but something was off. In the reflection of the screen, I could see myself, terrified, trembling, but there was someone else standing behind me. The child. I could feel its presence closing in, its breath chilling my skin. But the voice from the laptop continued, cutting through the oppressive dread. "Don't let it finish. Destroy the screen." Destroy the screen? The instructions were absurd, but I was desperate. The child's presence loomed closer, its thin, skeletal fingers reaching for me. I could feel the cold emanating from it, the malice, the hunger. If I didn't act, it would consume me. I grabbed the closest object, a heavy lamp, and swung it wildly, aiming for the laptop. The lamp connected with the screen, shattering it with a sickening crack. Sparks flew, and the video feed distorted violently, the static roaring like an animal in pain. The child screamed. The sound was not human. It was guttural, twisted, like 100 voices wailing in agony all at once. I collapsed to the floor, covering my ears, but the scream didn't stop. It was inside my head, burrowing deep into my mind. The room itself seemed to tremble under the weight of that horrific sound. The walls warped, the shadows writhed, and the temperature plummeted, freezing the air in my lungs. But then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the scream stopped. I dared to open my eyes. The room was still. I lay there, gasping for breath, my heart racing as I tried to make sense of what had just happened. The child was gone, no sign of it anywhere. The oppressive cold had lifted, and the room felt normal again. But the damage was done. The shattered laptop lay in pieces, its screen flickering faintly. I reached out, cautiously, as if touching it might bring the nightmare back. As my fingers brushed against the broken glass, I heard one last whisper, faint and almost relieved. "You stopped it for now." For now. My hand shook as I pulled away from the broken screen. The words echoed in my mind. For now. It wasn't over. The thing I had unleashed, the child, had been stopped, but it wasn't gone. Not completely. And somehow, deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before it found a way back. I stood up on shaky legs, my mind reeling. Everything that had happened felt like a blur, a fever dream I couldn't escape. But the fear was real. I could still feel it lurking, just at the edge of my senses, waiting for another chance to break through. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. The house was eerily quiet now, the silence almost suffocating. I didn't want to stay here any longer. I couldn't. Whatever I had done, whatever I had unleashed, this house was no longer safe. I packed a bag in a daze, grabbing whatever I could, and left without looking back. That was a few months ago. Since then, I've moved into a small apartment in a different part of the city. I haven't watched any horror videos, haven't dared to even think about them. For a while, I thought I was safe, that maybe I had left the nightmare behind. But last night, I heard something. A soft creaking, like floorboards shifting in the middle of the night. I ignored it at first, convincing myself it was just the building settling. But then, at exactly 3:03 a.m., I heard a whisper. Not from the hallway, not from outside, but from my laptop. It was on, even though I hadn't touched it in days. The screen was blank, except for a single message blinking in the center, over and over again. I'm still here. I shut it off, but I know it's only a matter of time. There are some things you can't escape, some things that cling to you no matter how far you run. I don't know what I released that night, but I know one thing for sure. It's coming back, and next time, I might not be able to stop it. The end for now.